Hi, everybody. I'm Otto Penzler. I'm the publisher of Central Park West, a new book by James Comey, who is with us today, and which is why you're here. Mr. Comey, as you know, is the former head of the FBI, a federal prosecutor, author of a best-selling book, sort of a memoir.
Sort
of a memoir, and now has written a crime novel, a fantastic crime novel, based on his career as a federal prosecutor. Jim, if I may, say hello to everybody here.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for being with us. I got a stack of books that I'm going to sign for you all while we talk and then take your questions. I'm looking forward to it.
He's going to be signing books for you all. I think that there are quite a few people who are looking forward to this. On Mr. Comey's previous tour, it's my understanding that he didn't sign a whole lot of books. There were huge crowds, there were crowd control issues, and so on. So it's an uncommon autograph. You won't see them in every bookshop. So this is a great opportunity for you to get a signed book.
Yeah, it's weird for me to say, but my signature was sought after. They used to chase me down the street trying to get me to sign stuff, and I wouldn't sign it. So. So for whatever that's worth, it's hard to get, and you all are going to get it on this.
Yeah, it's terrific. So tell us a little about the book, if that seems appropriate, which I think it is.
Yeah, I think it is, and I'm not going to give anything away because I hope that you all will read it and find it both fun and interesting. But the book follows a protagonist named Nora Carleton, who's a federal prosecutor, and she is prosecuting a mob case in Manhattan, something I did quite a bit of 30 years ago. And she is focused on her case, which she's finally going to put away a really bad mobster. And in the middle of her trial, something happens that makes her case collide with a case that was big in New York, but she wasn't paying attention to, involving the accusation that an estranged spouse had killed the former governor of New York. And her case and that case slam together and take her and her investigative team on a journey that I hope will be gripping and will show you what it's like inside a high-stakes case involving mafia, political corruption, violence, and a lot of tension, and ends in an exciting way, which I'm not going to tell you.
One of the things that struck me about the book is seeing the inner workings of the justice system, the FBI, the New York Police Department, the courts, and so on. It was really remarkable to have it explained and described and illustrated in such a clear way without getting into the bushes and doing the boring law stuff.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of boring law stuff out there, as you know.
Yeah.
And we've sworn off boring law stuff. But my goal in writing this book was to take you, the reader, inside these places that I've known. They say, write what you know. I've done that and tried to take you inside the FBI, inside courtrooms, inside investigative interviews, efforts to flip a mobster, to show you the way it really is. And it's pretty exciting in real life. And I hope I've captured that here, but not in a way that is lawyerly or boring. But I think you will not only find this fun, but you will learn about how it really works in a cool way.
Yeah, that's what struck me. I mean, there are many things about the book that struck me, but certainly that was an unexpected bonus. You know, one of the nice things about reading good writers, good mystery writers, is you not only get a thriller or a storyline, a plot that you want to follow, and maybe if you're lucky, you get a really good character that you're interested in. But the great bonus is getting background that you would not normally get. You would not normally sit down and read a book on police procedure in New York City, or how the FBI and the NYPD interact. And you did that, and so clearly and colorfully. Did that just come naturally to you?
I think so. Once the story was in my head, it was almost as if I was writing nonfiction, because it was a real thing based on real experiences I had had. And so I tried to capture exactly what it was like in my experience. And I found it addictive and thrilling. And so it was easy to tell the story in that way without having to exaggerate or make stuff up. And I drew a lot of it from real experience. I mean, I really had a mob witness who was one of the world's great art thieves, and he walked into the courtroom to testify for me in a racketeering case, and one of the mobsters mouthed to him, "You're dead." And I didn't see the mobster mouth that, but I saw my witness's face change, and I knew something had happened. So I try to capture that in the book, and I actually went back to the transcript from that trial to make sure I was getting it the way I remembered it, because it was very exciting and disconcerting and troubling in the moment, and I didn't need to make anything up because it had happened. And so I've tried to do a lot of that. The reason I love the job so much, being a mafia prosecutor, is the stakes were high, the people were colorful and weird and dangerous and scary, and I got a chance to not only interact with them, but to put a lot of them in jail for a long time. And so that was, seems weird for me to say, but fun for me. And so I've tried to have that fun flow through into the storytelling.
So you brought back real life stories and fictionalized them for this book. The book is filled with colorful characters as well on both sides of the law. And are those also based on real life characters?
Yeah, in the main, the protagonist, Nora Carleton, was inspired by my oldest daughter, who in a weird crossover of life experience was in the courtroom prosecuting a case when I was working on this. And it was the same courtroom 318, in which I had prosecuted the mobsters John and Joe Gambino when she was a little girl, when she was 4 years old. And she grew up to be the chief of the violent and organized crime unit in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, and to prosecute Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, and in that courtroom. And so it was obvious to make it a female protagonist. She was because I know this, strong, smart, tall woman. And so it was a labor of love to write that story, thinking of my daughter, but also drawing on my experience. And then her sidekick is a fellow named Benny Dugan, who's a 6'5", 250-pound collection of Brooklyn. And he is a great organized crime investigator. I knew that person in real life. It was a fellow named Kenny McCabe, who died way too young in 2006. And so the interactions between Nora and Benny are drawn from my memory in a lot of ways. And I was able to capture Benny's spirit and tell the story through his investigative technique and his large personality, which is based on a real person.
They have a great relationship together. The way they talk to each other, you would think that they have known each other and been friends or close for a quarter of a century, because they're so in tune with each other.
Yeah. The work brings people together in a tight way and an accelerated way. Being under that amount of pressure, spending that much time working on a case, creates a family on an investigative team that I've tried to capture. And the friction between the two of them is consistent with the healthy friction I had with the real Kenny McCabe, who had this notion that I didn't know how rough a person he was, and that I was a much better person than he was. And he used to call me Mr. Smooth because he thought I was very good in the courtroom. And so I, as a joke, called him Mr. Rough. And he would often say, I'm not as good a person as you think I am. And I would say, what makes you think I think you're a good person? So I've tried to capture that. I was actually in my basement before this rollout of the book, and I saw a caricature sketch that I'd been given when I left the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, signed by everybody who'd worked on mob cases with me. And his signature is in the right margin, and it says, "Mr. Smooth, the good guys will miss you, and so will I."
Yeah.
And then signs him. And so I've tried to bring that a larger than life person to life in this book in a way that I hope keeps the reader thinking about it after they're done reading.
Well, I think they will, because I know I sure did, and continue to. So your crooks are also based on real life crooks. The one that I mean, yeah, of course, the mob guys are always interesting. We all watched The Sopranos, and we found them interesting. But the real life guys are pretty weird too. Maybe not the smartest people in the world.
No.
But interesting, colorful in their own way. But the guy that I remember, of all the crooks, the ones I remember best is the thief.
Yeah.
The who goes and steals things basically on assignment,
Yep.
or consignment, whatever you call it. He's given a job. get me this. And he goes and steals it. That his name in the book was Frenchie.
Yeah, based on a real life Frenchie, different name, but a guy who came to the United States as a lad from France and lived the life that I describe in the book, and was one of the most colorful witnesses I ever met. When I met him, he was in a federal prison in Petersburg, Virginia, and I went down with FBI agents to try and recruit him to testify in a racketeering case. And he looked like the actor Dennis Leary, same gravelly voice, highly intelligent, and knew art like nobody had ever met, because he would only steal the best stuff. And he would steal on commission, on assignment. He'd be asked by a bad guy, I saw this painting in someone's apartment, I'd like it. And so Frenchie would figure out a way to get it without getting caught. And his problem was he got caught towards the end of his career. That forced him, out of self-interest, to be a witness. But I knew Frenchie and have tried to channel the real Frenchie in this book, because he was so colorful, so interesting, much smarter, as you said, than the mobsters, because he could tell during a burglary, he famously hit some galleries, and he wouldn't steal any crap because he knew art. He knew what the old masters, what the right piece of work were, and he would take them, be delicate with them, roll them up in one of those cardboard tubes and steal them, and then sell them to the people who'd commissioned him, making far less than they did, because the mobsters only paid him a piece of the action. But the real Frenchie was and also very high strung, almost a very artistic, and you had to make sure with Frenchie, you didn't rub him the wrong way or you'd have a bad day the whole day. And that's why when he walked out into the courtroom in real life and his life was threatened, I could immediately tell on his face that something had gone terribly wrong, and it was hard to get him back on track. But being able to, and I know where he is today, he's dead. He's buried on Hart Island, the Potter's Field here in New York. And because I did research when I was writing this book, I said, I wonder what happened to Frenchie, the real Frenchie. And he died, had a heroin addiction towards the end of his life. And so he's buried in Potter's Field, but lived a incredibly colorful, and I don't want to be too admiring, a crime-filled life that I advise none of you to participate in. But he was another larger-than-life figure that I've tried to bring to this book to make it real and interesting.
I remember there was an essay, an episode in the book, which is embarrassing. As your editor, when I wrote and I said, Jim, I don't think this is doable. I don't think anybody could actually pull this off, because I'm reading it. I don't find it credible. Is there something you can do to make me believe that this actually could happen? And then what did you say?
Well, I wrote back to Otto saying, this is from real life. This theft happened in this way, and so I'm reluctant to change it, even though this is fiction. But it was a good point, which is I want to capture real life, but sometimes real life is so weird that you won't believe it if you read it on the pages of a book.
Yeah, I mean, cliches become cliches for a reason, and the cliche is truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah,
sometimes, and in this case it was, and you did make it totally believable.
Yeah. Now, so it's fiction now.
No,
for
it's
sure.
fiction.
For sure.
You're writing
for
fiction.
Sure.
So tell me about. You said your heroine Nora is somewhat based on your own daughter. How does she feel about being the star of a book?
I think it's a little bit of a cringe, as she would say, for her. As you said, Nora Carleton is not entirely my oldest daughter, but she's drawn from, I have 4 daughters, all of whom are smart and strong and tall for good reason. And I try to draw from all of them to put together Nora, but mostly my oldest, who is a federal prosecutor, as I said. And so she read the book twice before publication to fact check me and to also see if there was anything that was really going to be too much of a cringe moment for her. And she was okay with it, the portrayal, and she loved the characters, and she tweaked a few things that I'd gotten wrong. I had her office on the wrong floor, so I moved it to the correct floor, and a few other minor details. But in the main, she liked it a lot, and I think she's hoping, her colleagues are very excited about it. Word has spread through the law enforcement community about this book. And so I think she's actually excited that they're going to read it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Does she know in real life, does she know any of the people that you knew who appear in this book, even if in minor roles?
Yes. She knew Kenny McCabe when she was a little girl, because I worked with Kenny, who is Benny Dugan in this book, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney. And then I came back after September 11th to be the chief federal prosecutor, the United States attorney. And Kenny was still there, and he would help me move around. My family was still living in Virginia, and so Kenny would drive me back and forth to the airport quite a bit, screaming out the window at New York drivers and screeching up in front of LaGuardia Airport, and totally relaxed, because he had a very different, he was able to control his temperament in ways I couldn't. And then he would just say hello home. I'd say, thanks, man. I'm jittery getting out of the car. But he helped my family settle in New York too. And he would, whenever I wanted to take my family out to eat to an Italian restaurant, he would say, which one? And I'd give him the name, and he'd say, no, you got to find another one. Meaning it's controlled by the mob.
Oh.
And so I would say, why don't you give me a list of approved restaurants? And so in that context, he got to know all of my kids and my wife. And she also knows well, I patterned a defense lawyer named Maddie Parker in here. I'm one of my great friends who is currently a defense lawyer, and she's known him for many years. He was actually her emergency contact when she first moved to New York as a little girl. She had to write on the school forms. She didn't know anybody, but she listed this guy. So long-standing relationships.
That's great. So, I mean, I already know, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, because not everybody does. Are you writing another book? And will Nora and some of these other people, Benny and so on, appear in that book?
Thank you, Mr. Publisher, for asking that question. Yes is the answer. Otto hasn't seen it yet.
No, I haven't.
But I have already finished a draft of the next book that Nora is a central character in, and other familiar characters will continue to be involved. A crime novel that's set in a different context, also in the New York area, but I've written this one in the context of a world I also came to know, which is the world of elite hedge funds, where I worked for 3 years. And so it's fictional, but it will show people, I hope, a pretty good view of what that world is like in the context of a very exciting story. And so Nora will be in that book. And my publishers told me not to talk about a third book, because you don't want people to know what might happen to the characters
Exactly
in the
right.
second book.
Exactly right.
So enough said there.
Enough said. I think you have a challenge in this book, in your second book, because you were able to make all of the legal stuff interesting. You didn't get in the weeds. You moved it along. You made it comprehensible and interesting to everybody. And now you're going to be writing about hedge funds. If you can make that interesting, you're a genius.
I feel good about it. I have a lot of volunteer editors in my family, and then I have a circle of friends who love me enough to want to brutalize me. And the consensus among my friends is they love Central Park West. They think the next one is better. And that I didn't get caught in the financial weeds in a way. And so we'll see. We'll see what my publisher and editor thinks of it. But it's another one that I really enjoy writing, because these characters are alive for me, and I know the context in which they're struggling and dealing with difficult issues in the second book. So I've had a lot of fun doing it. There's a lot of work ahead, obviously, but I hope that you all will enjoy this very much. And if you do, and I think you will, you'll really like the second one as well.
Okay, well, I really like this book. Being a publisher and a bookseller, I don't know anything about real money, serious money. So hedge funds is so arcane to me that I'm worried that we're going to start talking about the International Monetary Fund or something like that.
Yeah, no, but it's people. It's people doing bad things, doing good things, complicated, difficult people in compelling challenges, but in a setting that is different than this one. But it's not going to be when I first was hired to work there, I knew nothing about the financial world. So they didn't know this, but I bought Investing for Dummies. I read that so that I would at least understand some of the conversations, and came to know a lot more about it as time went by. But you won't even need to have read Investing for Dummies to get this one.
Okay, I trust you. I trust you. Maybe we should take some questions from people who have written in. Are
Sure,
you
that'd
up
be
for
great.
that?
Yeah. I'll keep working while we're doing that.
So here's one that says from Mary Lou. She's also from the Washington area. She says, politics is like another sport around here. How weird was it for you to be viewed as a celebrity, both good and bad? How difficult was it to be thrown into the spotlight and eventually going out of it? That's more than one
Thanks.
question.
No, it's a very good overarching question. It was never one of my career goals to be famous. I try to explain to people who think fame is a good thing that it's like cotton candy. It looks good at the circus, but it's bad for you and bad for your teeth, and it's empty calories. And so I never aspired to that. And I'm actually a bit of an introvert. And so I never liked the sort of the political type engagement with large audiences continually. I mean, I liked to do it when it was part of my job, but I didn't get energy from it. And so I found it weird to be, I would try and hide a little bit, and I'm a giraffe. And so I would sort of hunch over a little bit. And finally, I just realized that people are going to recognize me. And there are haters out there, obviously, but haters aren't really going to talk to me. And so people who want to say something just want to be nice. And so I've gotten over my discomfort. Now I'm in a phase where people just think they know me from somewhere, that I must be went to school with someone they know, or I'm from their neighborhood. I actually tried to explain to one nice older woman in a grocery store just outside of Richmond, Virginia, who said I looked familiar to her. And I said, well, I used to work for the government. And she said, no, I don't think that's it. And I said, well, I used to be the director of the FBI. And she said, no, that's not it. So finally I said, okay, I'm sorry. And so I just walked away after that. But it's, people are in the main lovely, but the fading of that, particularly that really hot spotlight when I was director of the FBI, and then after I got fired, I don't miss that spotlight in particular. And I'll say one other thing, that I'll shut up. It's particularly hard on my family in a way that I honestly didn't fully appreciate, because all of you know this, the people who love you worry more about what other people say about you than you do. And so my wife and children, I never read Twitter comments, for example. My wife and children absorbed a lot of that, and it caused them pain that I missed. And I regret missing that, and I regret that they had to experience that. So becoming a crime thriller writer is, to my mind, I'm not looking to be famous. I hope we'll sell a lot of books, but it's a different kind of thing, a different kind of spotlight, and will be better for my family, especially.
Yeah. Which leads to the next question. Terry in Michigan asks, what inspired you to write a crime novel?
I was inspired is probably the wrong word, because I was nudged to do it by the editor who worked on one of my nonfiction books, because he thought I wrote narrative and stories well. And so he pushed me, and I first raised the idea of me doing it in league with an established writer. And I said, if I do it, I'd really like to do it alone. I love to write, and I've always loved to write. And for the farther I got away from the work, the more open I was to the idea. And so I decided to give it a shot. And as you know, I've found this really fulfilling, and I've just loved it. And this is what I want to do when I grow up. And so I hope this is successful, because I don't want to dump on law firms or anything. I mean, I could go work at a law firm. I don't want to do that. I would like to do this. And because I love it. It not only gets me the opportunity to think about things that I care about, imagine characters that are based on people that I love, but I find the process of writing and crafting it difficult and also really, really fulfilling.
Well, I think you're going to have a lot of fans once they read this. They'll be looking forward to more books in the future, rightly so. Let me hand some of those over to you. Carol in Indiana asks, is there a main theme in this book that you want your readers to take away?
You know, I really want you to decide that as the reader. What I think the book is about is the nature and quality of the people involved in the system, in the criminal justice system. And I hope you'll see them as complicated, because in my experience, all people are complicated. No one is entirely good, entirely bad. We're all a mix of those things. And so I hope it offers a window into the way people really are, because my lived experience is that in the overwhelming main, the people who are trying to do justice in the system are good people. And they make mistakes, and they do things that they didn't mean to do or maybe shouldn't have done, but they're trying to do it in the right way. And even with that, it's very, very exciting. So mostly I hope it's about the nature and quality of the people in this system. And then I hope I highlight the challenge of understanding the difference between truth and justice, that there are lots of things that you all and I can know in my heart are true that aren't sufficiently provable to achieve justice. And that sometimes you're not able to make a case and bad guys get away. And we've set up our system that way on purpose to protect the innocent. And it's something that takes you a while to get used to when you're working in the system. But I hope also to illuminate that for people.
Kind of answered this, but it's worth going back over. Catherine in Arizona said, what was the creative process like behind developing the characters in this book and the overall plotline?
It was a process of sitting and talking over coffee with my wife, mostly. My wife, Patrice, has great story vision. If she were here, she wouldn't want to be here. Not that she doesn't like us, but she wouldn't want to be here talking about stuff. This is not her world. And she's not a writer. She'd be the first to tell you that. But she's really good at imagining stories. And so the way we work is she comes up, she'll sit over coffee and say, hey, I got an idea. Let me run it by you. She calls it throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. And so she'll say, what about this? And I'll say, that's interesting. So how would that go? And then we discuss it. And then once we have an idea for the story, when she has an idea for the story, then we start talking about who the characters might be and what they might be like. And once from that conversation, I have an overall sense of it, I go away and write, as I did for this, a summary of the story, and then a blurb on each of the characters, what they're like and what they look like, what they sound like. And then she looks at it on a Google Doc and suggests changes or comments. And then I iterate and iterate. And once we've agreed that this makes sense, I then go off and try and create it into a story, a collection of scenes. Where would this be and how would it go? Because that's the world that I know, both the writing and knowing the inside of this system. And then she would review it and iterate and give me loving and direct feedback on how it's going. And that's our process. And so our marriage has survived that, which is because it was more time together, as I said to her the other day, than we even spent dating. And involving her telling me when my stuff isn't very good. And that I found fun, painful. It's, even if someone loves you, it's painful to get feedback and realize that they're right. And the great thing about Google Docs is I would have time to adjust. First, I would deny to myself that she was right. Then I would read it again. I'd say she may be right. Then I'd read it a third time saying, yeah, she's right. I got to fix this. And so I was able to alone go through that process, which would have been more painful if we were doing it over coffee and she was telling me that to my face. So that's too much information, but that's the process.
No, I think it's interesting. And I think people would like to know that. I like knowing it. So I think everybody would. Jacob in South Carolina is asking a question that I think has been asked in the right way. I said, are you going to continue with a whole series of crime novels?
Yes.
And the answer has been yes.
Yes. And I have, because Patrice has in her head, and now I have in my head, the outline for a third book that's based in New York, in Manhattan, and returning the scene to Lower Manhattan, to the world of the FBI and federal courts and NYPD, the way that Central Park West is. And where it goes from there, we'll see. But my vision for this career is to write a that takes as I've been. And so I would imagine, we'll see how it goes down the road, but I would imagine, look, I've spent a lot of time in the White House Situation Room, in the FBI headquarters, at the CIA, on Capitol Hill, that there are stories that to be told that take you, the reader, into those places in a fun and interesting and very real way. So we'll see. But the first three, or we finished the second, the third we have a pretty good picture of. And Patrice tried to talk to me about it again the other day over coffee, and I said, "Look, I can't talk about three just yet. I'm trying to get one out.
Yeah.
I'm trying to finish two." But it's a job, as you know. People don't realize there's a ton of work after you write a story to fix it, to change it, to correct it, to tweak it. I've heard an author describe the first draft of a book as taking out of a quarry a gigantic piece of rock. And then thereafter is a lot of chiseling to get it into final form.
Yeah. Hemingway, I'm paraphrasing, said something like, the first time I write the book, it's for me. It's fun for me. And then after that, when I rewrite and edit and rewrite, that's for readers.
Yeah.
Because that's when it becomes work.
Yeah. And I found that it's important for me to give myself a pep talk, to stay in it, right? To until the whistle blows, keep going, because there are times when I've read Central Park West, I don't know how many times.
Yeah,
there are times when I'll find my eyes, when I'm supposed to be reading it for correction, to start moving fast, and they have to stop, stay in it, because I want this to be perfect for the readers.
Perfect is hard.
Very hard. And I will never get there. Right. I will never get there.
Here's an interesting question. I don't think that when I've been around that you've been asked before. Lincoln in Florida says, "What's been the highlight of your career?"
I think the highlight of my career, my favorite part of my career, was when I wasn't in charge of anybody else's problems. Being a leader is about other people's problems, not your own. I loved the times when I was just in charge of my own cases. And that was true in New York, where I was a federal prosecutor. That was true in Richmond, Virginia, where I was a federal prosecutor. And then I got promoted up into leadership roles, which are rewarding in a different way, but less fun. But the reason I'm hesitating is I can think of individual things that happened to me that are the most memorable. And it's a hard story for me to tell because I'll get emotional, but I remember a day when we found a little girl who had been kidnapped when I was FBI director. And she was a beautiful 6-year-old girl with long hair and brown eyes who was kidnapped by a stranger off her front lawn in Wilmington, North Carolina. And because I have a family that I care deeply about, my team knew that I was interested in these cases. So I got briefed on it one day, and they said, "We'll keep you posted, but it doesn't look good, boss," because stranger kidnappings almost never end well. And so almost 24 hours went by, and 24 hours is a really important period in a kidnapping. And they hadn't found this little girl. And all of a sudden, there's a knock on my office door. I'm sitting in the FBI director's office, and in walks the head of the FBI's criminal division. And he slaps an 8x10 picture on my desk in front of me, color picture. And it's a little girl looking up with a chain around her neck, looking up at the camera. So she's looking directly at me. And as he puts it down, he says, "Boss, we found her. We found her. And she's okay. She was chained to a tree by this psycho in the woods. And she was covered in mosquito bites from having spent the night without clothes to protect her. But he was going to come back and do awful things to her. And we found him and we saved her." And I started crying sitting at my desk, and I couldn't speak. And so I just held up my hand to him like that. And he turned back as he was leaving, and he said, "This is one of the good days." And it's such a vivid memory for me that it's still one of the highlights of my life, is that, and I'm not going to say her name. I know her name and I know her story, and she's back with her family. But it was one of the highlights of my entire career, because there's so much darkness that you see in that work that I try to push away, that moments like that really stand out. So.
Well, that's a little more powerful than some other people might say about the highlight of their career.
Yeah.
What led you to the FBI, to a career in the FBI?
I was a federal prosecutor by happenstance. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to help people when I got out of law school. I was sitting in a jury box in the old federal courthouse where a lot of the action takes place, And the judge let us sit there. I was working for a judge for a year when something was going on in the courtroom that he thought we might find interesting, my co-clerk and I. And I was 25, and I'm sitting there in the jury box, and I'm watching what I thought was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. It was the government trying to hold without bail the boss of the Genovese crime family, one of the 5 New York families, a guy named Fat Tony Salerno. And I was sitting in the jury box watching 2 federal prosecutors, not much older than I, make the case that he's a danger to the community, so the judge should let him go. And the FBI had gotten a court order for a bug under Fat Tony's table in his social club called the Palma Boy Social Club in East Harlem. And in those days, East Harlem, part of Manhattan, was a Italian enclave, and he had his social club there. And he could be heard talking about whacking people and breaking their legs and all kinds of stuff. And so I'm watching these 2 prosecutors put this case on, and Fat Tony's out of central casting, right? He's a fat guy, he got his reputation, he got his name, he deserved it. Shaved head, unlit stogie in his mouth. And he would call out in court when his lawyers weren't doing a good enough job. With this gravelly voice, he'd say, "It's an outrage, Your Honor." And so I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, and I've always hated bullies. And so I was struck by lightning, proverbial rhetorical lightning, thank goodness. And I went and called my girlfriend, now my wife, and I said, "I know what I want to do with my life." She said, "That's wonderful. What is it?" I said, "I want to be a federal prosecutor. If I can be part of putting these people away, wow." And so that's how I started my career in law enforcement. And I got to do that. And I got to do it here in New York, a place my wife didn't love living. And I thought my career was done in the government. When I left the hedge fund in Connecticut in 2013, I started teaching at Columbia University. And I got a call out of the blue from the Attorney General, literally out of the blue, asking me would I come down and talk to him and then President Obama, about being FBI director. And so I said no. And I said, it's too much for my family. And then I called him back the next morning after I found my wife in the kitchen on her laptop on Zillow.com looking at houses in DC. And I'm not a great investigator, but I knew she was up to something. And she said, "Look, I've known you since you were 19. You got to call him back and say, you'll at least have a conversation." And then she added, "But they're never going to pick you. And I hope you have that kind of love in your life." And so then I went down and interviewed, and I met President Obama, who I'd never met before, and he asked me to be FBI director. So that's how I ended up at the FBI, an institution I'd known my whole career. I'd worked really closely with FBI agents, and you'll see part of that in Central Park West, but I'd never been on the inside. And so I had a pretty good view of the Bureau, but in 4 years there, I developed a really good, close view of the Bureau, a place I came to know and love and think needed to be better.
Okay. I forgot to say that question was from Shannon in Georgia. And here's a question from Kathy in Montana. What advice would you give to someone who is waiting to be in law enforcement? And then she says, or in the FBI. I think that the FBI is actually law enforcement.
But different kind of law enforcement in a way. My advice would be, first of all, be patient, especially if you're looking to get into the FBI. I used to say that our human resources moved at the speed of wood. And so you need to be patient. It takes a long time. And so I would stay physically active, healthy, stay active in your community, and look for ways to broaden yourself because the FBI is looking for people who have good judgment. This is true even if you're going into another organization. So, and if you're in school, do well in school and don't get in trouble. And it's fairly straightforward. The Bureau was, I remember on my protective detail, I had an agent who'd been a high school chemistry teacher in Northern Virginia. I had people who'd been more traditional roles in the military or lawyers, but there were people who had been personal trainers, who had been actors, who had come from all different walks of life because they wanted to be part of that institution. So focus on your physical health, obviously broadening your intellectual life, and making sure that you don't get yourself in trouble. And I know people ask me this all the time, so I'll volunteer it. I know a lot of states have started to move towards decriminalizing marijuana, which I happen to think is a good thing, but just be very careful and thoughtful about that because it's still against the law federally. And the Bureau is reducing the amount of time where they will disqualify somebody for having used marijuana. I think it's now down to like a year. But do not smoke pot close to your interviews with a law enforcement organization till you understand how they're going to think about it. Because I would hate for great people. One of my real challenges when I was director is I need to hire great people. And I need to hire great people, especially in tech, creative people. And a lot of them want to smoke weed on the way to the interview. And so navigating that was a real challenge, mostly because Congress was very keen that I not relax the standards. So just keep that front of mind. Sorry, you never thought you'd get this advice during a book signing. Listen, kids.
Oh, I can imagine somebody showing up sort of cloudy. Oh man, yeah, I want to be a cop, you know. Well, this might be an awkward question, but we'll ask it anyway because you can handle the tough stuff. Scott in California says, what characteristics do you possess that allowed you to excel to the highest level in your career?
I think the most important thing is that I'm sort of a mix of assertiveness and open-mindedness. That is, I can be, one of my weaknesses is actually I can be too strong. I can convince myself I'm being decisive, for example, when I'm being impulsive. But I have a pretty clear picture of my strengths and weaknesses, and I work really hard to be open to being wrong and to understanding that I see the world through a soda straw made up of my experiences and my background, and that's an inherent weakness. And so that ability, I try and coach people and say, dare to be dumb, dare to be wrong, dare to ask questions, and it will make you a better performer, whatever you're doing, but it'll make you a better leader. The challenge of that is a lot of people think that manifests weakness, that saying, I don't know, or I need your help is a sign of weakness when it's a sign of wisdom. I actually keep on my desk in my home office a little saying that says, trust only the one who doubts. And so I have come to embrace doubt as a strength and not a weakness. And that's really helped me because often I'll see a situation and I'll think, I know what to do. Then I'll step back and say, wait a minute, maybe you're seeing this wrong. And I'll try and get people to help me see it better, and it leads to better decisions. So that's what I would urge. And look, if you're a person that comes at it from the opposite end of the seesaw, that is you are too open to being wrong, too doubtful of yourself, when you got to work to achieve a better balance, to be more assertive, because that kind of open-mindedness can be crippling. So look for that balance.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, great. I got to sign one more book.
From James in Colorado. When faced with adversity, how do you overcome it?
Well, I first recognize that I may not fully overcome it. Like all of you, I've had tragedy and loss in my life, and so sometimes bad things just happen. I try to do a number of things. I try to maintain my physical health and my emotional and mental health. I'm very attentive to it. I used to say this to people in the FBI, make sure you get sleep, make sure you love somebody, make sure you care for yourself, because you can't think in a storm if you're tired and stressed and beat up. And so I also try to rise above the adversity and travel in time and go to a place in the future, look back on this moment and ask myself, right, I've had to make very difficult decisions. How will I explain this to a class of sixth graders in 10 years? What will I say? What will I say was the basis for the decision? And that's really helpful is that blows away all the nonsense reasons for a decision, because you're not going to be able to tell sixth graders in 10 years, I made that decision because I was tired, or I really didn't want to offend people, or some political friendship, some other consideration. That'll force you to deal with that adversity in a way that the resolution of it stands the test of time. So that's my best advice.
Pretty fair. I think that's going to do it for us today. I think you've signed all of the books.
I think I got it.
Just about.
Yeah.
And thank you all for listening and for buying the book. I know that you're going to really like this book a lot. I'm not thinking that you're going to like it. I know you're going to like it. So I'm a tough reader. I've been reading mystery fiction for 50 years, and professionally involved in the mystery world for almost 50 years. I've read a lot of books, and this is one of those books that will stay with you once you've read it, and you're going to be glad that you did. Thanks a lot for turning in.
Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoy it.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.